Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. A few more people entering the room. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to GCC's annual meeting. My name is Faisal Karmali. Those of you who have known the organization for a while will recognize my face. I'm the current chair of the Gowanus Canal Conservancy. I'm joined by several of our staff and colleagues. We're super excited to have all of you here. Welcome to new council member Shahana Hanif. It's great to see you here as well. I've been a supporter long before you were in your role now, and we're glad that you continue to support us now as well. We're going to get started. I know people are still making their way into the room. This is our 2021 annual meeting. We are always super excited about these annual meetings. It gives us a chance to share a lot of the incredible work we're doing and also give our members and the wider community a glimpse into our ambitions for the year ahead. Before we get going, I'm going to share a couple just ground rules. I know we've all been on Zoom for probably 2 years now. Just so you know, your microphones will be muted by our team during the presentations. We definitely want participation. This is always a great chance to engage with the community along with all the in-person events and interactions we have. And so we will have breakout sessions. You're welcome to unmute your microphones and participate actively there. I also want to let everyone know that the event will be recorded. You probably saw a notification as you came into the room. If you want to opt out of being in the video, you're welcome to turn off your video so that you're not included. Today's agenda, so that you have a sense of how we're going to use our short time together. We'll start with highlights of the year that is coming to a close. It's clearly been a very eventful year, not just with the rezoning that's been happening, but as you all know, GCC is involved in loads of work beyond the advocacy work we've been doing around the rezoning. And then we're going to have two breakout groups. One to give you a sense of the breadth of our community stewardship work, and then the other is to get a better sense of our neighborhood advocacy work. And again, stewardship and advocacy are central to who we are as GCC. And so I know some of you will have a hard time picking, but you're welcome to pick a group and get a feel for things in those two areas. And then we'll close out with a chance for all of you. Many of you clearly already know how to get involved. You're our regular attendees at various events. You're here at the annual meeting. But of course, there's always ways to continue upping the way you get involved, and we'll share that. I wanted to remind everyone, some of you may be new to the room, that we've got a mission that anchors us in our work. Many of you have heard this before. We envision a Gowanus Canal and surrounding environment that is clean, resilient, diverse, and alive. That is our anchor. All of the decisions around programming, around what we advocate for, how we advocate is anchored by that vision. That leads us to our mission, and the mission starts to evolve around that vision. And you are probably well aware of the various types of work we do, that we advocate and care for ecologically sustainable parks and public spaces in the Gowanus lowlands. And central to our work is empowering a community of stewards. And many of you who are on this call at this meeting are part of that community of stewards. Before we jump into the updates on 2021, It has been my absolute pleasure to serve on the board now for, I think, over 6 years, and as chair, getting close to 3. I'm thrilled to announce that there will be a new leadership team on the board. Marcos Diaz-Gonzalez, who has served as vice chair and joined the board with me 6 years ago, or a bit more than that, is stepping up to take on the role of chair. He's been the vice chair for a few years now. And taking on the role of vice chair is Venetia Lannon, who's also an incredible board member, and will be upping her engagement even more. And I'm super thankful to both of them. The change is coming just in time with the arrival of my new daughter. I have a 1-month-old that I'm very excited by, but that will be demanding a lot more of my time. And we as a board recognize that we all want to be giving in the best way possible. And so I'm super excited to introduce you to Marcos and invite Marcos to say a few words.
Faisal, thank you, and you know, and also congratulations on you know, your growing family. Time flies very quickly, because I remember about 7 years ago when my older daughter would volunteer as a middle schooler through the curriculum that the GCC had put together, and then my younger daughter did the same thing. I've been a volunteer for 7 years. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to volunteer as the chair of the board. I have been committed to this organization. It's something that I love to do. I think just about every day what I can do to help and to move the mission forward. And all you're going to get from me is just a commitment to try to bring any resources that the organization needs, and to really try to do the right thing. I am looking forward, of course, to continue to work with Andrea, with all our friends at the staff, and with a great co-chair, Venetia Lannon, who I've known also for many years and who I have tremendous respect for. So I'll pass it on to Venetia.
Thank you, Marcos. I don't have much to add to that, other than it's an absolute pleasure to be here virtually with you all, and really looking forward to the sessions today, especially where we get to enter into the Q&A and have some real conversation with you. We've accomplished so much. There is so much more to do, and really looking forward to the dialogue and the exchange, if not the hors d'oeuvres. Thanks.
Great. Before we move into the next part of our day, I did want to, as I always do, thank everyone. Thank you to our volunteers. Thank you to our volunteer committee. Thank you to the green team. Thank you to our staff who've worked incredibly hard. Welcome to our new staff in 2021, Cameron King, Wayne Dawkins, and Emily Ruby. We're super excited to have you on board. Speaking of the word board, thank you to our board. And importantly, thank you to our members and supporters. This community has been behind GCC, sharing its perspective, sometimes aligned, sometimes not, always welcome. And of course, so many of you step forward to go beyond sharing perspectives to supporting us in a variety of ways, with your time, with your knowledge, with your expertise, with your connections, and of course, with your financial support. And so thank you to everyone for that. I'm going to hand it over now to Andrea, our extraordinary executive director, to take us through the highlights of the past year.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Faisal, and Marcos and Venetia. I'm super excited to work with you moving forward. But as excited as I am, I also just want to really thank Faisal. Can we go to the next slide? For his incredible service. I mean, so I met Faisal on top of this compost pile in 2014, soon after I had joined as a staff member, and immediately thought he would be a great fit for the board. And I'm so thankful for the years of work you've put in. So maybe we could have a quick and weird Zoom applause for Faisal.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so 2021. It's been really a year defined by, recovery and resilience and collaboration, really working across the organization to ensure that our programs continue to adapt as health protocols adapt and needs of the community adapt. We've been managing advocacy on 2 intense land use review processes that we'll talk about, and identifying key areas for collaboration and advocacy as we look towards a new administration, and ensuring that we continue to invest in our staff and community as we plan for organizational growth. So I wanted to highlight 2, can you go back a slide? Just 2 collaborations that we're really proud of being part of this past year. So a highlight was forming a new collaboration called the RAIN Coalition, which is supported by the NYC Green Fund, in collaboration with Bronx River Alliance, Newtown Creek Alliance, and the HOPE program, to really think about how to build more sustainable green infrastructure maintenance across New York City. And then closer to home, we held strong with the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice, a coalition we've been working with for now 6 years to advocate for and win key priorities towards a just rezoning. And then looking internally, next slide. We were also able to really spend some time on strategic planning and to refine sort of clear strategies and objectives towards our organizational goals of community, public space, and ecosystem health, all undergirded by a sustainable and inclusive organization. Over the past year, we were able to implement the first year of this framework, and we'll be looking internally this winter to refine metrics, objectives, and corresponding budget implications for the coming years. I'm going to give you a quick overview of our 2021 programs. So over the past year, almost 14,000 K-12 students took part in our education programs, with a mix of in-person and virtual programs depending on both the needs of the students and teachers and existing health and vaccine protocols. 671 K-5 students were engaged in both virtual and in-person urban ecology field trips to learn about urban ecology, plants, and stewardship. 390 middle school students worked on green infrastructure design proposals for their schools. And then winning students from each school were able to present their projects to a jury of professionals. 312 middle and high school students were engaged in virtual water quality and also in-person mussel habitat field trips. This is in partnership with the Gowanus dredgers, and we're actually working to mold mussel habitats to insert onto the new bulkheads to see whether we can start growing mussel habitat back on the canal. Since the pandemic, we've been sort of scaling back the number of volunteers we work with and really focusing on deeper engagement with local volunteers. So in 2021, 310 volunteers engaged in over 1,400 hours of stewardship. Included in this, the Gowanus Tree Network, which is tree stewards on blocks throughout the Gowanus, worked to enlarge 18 tree beds and install 35 tree guards. At this particular location in this photo, new trees had been planted and died twice because of lack of care. Now with these new tree guards and regular maintenance from local volunteers, the trees are thriving. Through the Lowlands Nursery, we distributed almost 5,000 plants and 2,000 buckets of compost. And of those 5,000 plants, about a third of them were either donated or at highly reduced prices to local community gardens, parks, and other neighborhood needs. Next. And then we also planted plants. So we planted about over 1,000 plants throughout the 22 gardens in Gowanus that we care for, as well as tree beds on 6 blocks through Gowanus. During the pandemic, we've kept the 2022 Green Team or 2021 Green Team, our youth apprenticeship program, much smaller to just 2 returning apprentices that were working on an expanded schedule. So this allowed us to test longer term engagement and leadership development. We see this program as a key area of growth moving forward, and starting this spring and over the coming years, we'll be expanding the program to 16 youth over 6 months. This will create deeper engagement with a larger cohort and build long-term alumni networks. Engaging and empowering diverse local community members and caring for the local environment is always going to be a key pillar. And particularly over the next 15 years, we're going to continue to grow this. At the same time, it runs in parallel with what's happening in Gowanus and the work that we're doing on neighborhood advocacy. So I'm going to talk through some of the very large things that have happened in Gowanus advocacy this year. We'll go into a little bit more depth in the breakout room as well. So the major area of our advocacy has been on the Gowanus rezoning. And this process has been going on for many years. This year it came to a head and actually went through the formal land use review process. It's a large-scale change of use and density in North Gowanus and along 4th Avenue. And the primary goal of the action is really to increase affordable housing. However, through sustained advocacy and engagement from the community, we've been able to secure numerous substantial and long-term wins for resiliency, for green and blue things that, GCC, that are key to GCC missions, but as well as commitments to the arts and public housing in particular. So some of the high-level wins, our number one, we worked very closely with the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice to advocate. And we really stuck together and said, we're not gonna back down from any of these asks. And we won $200 million for complete apartment renovations for both Gowanus and Gowanus Houses and Wyckoff Gardens. We also won a clear commitment to ensuring that the rezoning does not contribute to additional combined sewage overflow into the canal, with long-term tracking that will actually ensure that that promise is kept, as well as long-term planning for flood resiliency, investments in parks and public space, better waterfront design standards, and then I think in some ways, most importantly, a commitment to a long-term task force that can oversee all these demands to ensure that the stuff actually happens. And that's really the next step, this is in some ways, this work is just the beginning. We now need to follow up on all of the commitments the city has made to the neighborhood. And again, I'm really excited to work with our new council members, in particular, Lincoln Restler and Shahana Hanif, who's here tonight, to really work on pushing these things forward, to form the task force, make sure that all these commitments are met, and then also form a parks improvement district to manage long-term maintenance and programming of the public realm. At the same time, the Superfund has been moving forward. So the Superfund process, just as a reminder, includes dredging and capping historic industrial contamination from the bottom of the canal. So over the past year, the dredging has just about finished at the north end of the canal, and this is the phase 1 area. And what they're currently doing is in situ stabilization. So actually on the left, this machine is pumping concrete into areas of contamination that still remain to stabilize it. They will then put a multi-layered cap over that. Next phase, in phase 2, there will be a fair amount of bulkhead construction starting over the coming year to shore up the land so that they can start dredging there. Next. As we have discussed from the beginning of the Superfund process, this really super important cleanup work is also eliminating soft intertidal ecologies along the entire waterfront. We, in the Gowanus Ecosystem Survey report that we just published this year, we showed the observations of over 4,000 observations of over 1,000 species that we've seen along the canal. And so as that first phase draws to a close, leaving a clean canal that also has no ecology left in it, a key area of our work is building the ecology back through floating wetlands and waterfront esplanades with tidal wetlands built in. This is going to be a big area of our advocacy focus moving forward to identify both short-term pilots and longer-term investments under the natural resource damages assessment. And just a shout out to a couple of volunteers here, Peter Reich, who's installed a little floating garden at the salt lot. That's one of the what are the small interventions that we can start making in order to build back that ecology. And then finally, part of the Superfund, the city is starting work early next year on both sewage holding tanks. to build 12 million gallons of storage for combined sewage overflow. Designs for the northern tank include public space, which is fairly passive, but we actually see a lot of potential for designs for the southern tank, which is at the mid-canal tank here, to encourage even more open space, but also ecosystem restoration and really soft edges and water access. So again, that'll be a big advocacy focus moving forward. But first, a little more near and dear to my heart, this project directly impacts our home base, the salt lot. As many of you know, and as have been involved in over the past 10 years, we've been gardening, composting, and building community on the salt lot. In 2011, we set up a shipping container as a tool shed and started gardening along the edge. Every year, the compost and stewardship facilities at the salt lot support 16 jobs, engage 750 volunteers and 500 students, compost 150 tons of organic matter, and distribute over 4,000 plants to public and neighborhood gardens. Today, the salt lot is the most biodiverse site along the canal. During annual biological surveys, we've documented over 280 species on the site, including many considered species of greatest conservation need by the state because they're vulnerable or imperiled in New York. But unfortunately, many of these programs will be temporarily displaced during construction of the bulkhead and sewage tank. The city has committed to ensuring that we have both a temporary site and a long-term home back on the salt lot. But by February 2022, so just 2 months from now, our nursery and all of our stewardship programs will relocate for at least 2 years to another site along the canal. And the lot will be very different when we come back to it. And that, again, that advocacy process to ensure that the long-term design of the salt lot is one of the next sort of pieces of work over the coming years. But before we left, we want to make sure that all the work we put into growing all of this ecology was not lost. So over this fall, we opened up the salt lot gardens for transplanting. So folks came from across the neighborhood and city and transplanted, almost 700 plants to new homes. And, that included small perennials that were, little salt marsh plugs, as well as very large trees that had really grown up over the years. I think it's been amazing for everyone who has gardened at the salt lot to see this process and know that the incredible place we grew over the last 10 years is going to have a future life, as well as we have the capacity to grow this again. So at this point, we're actually going to go into our breakout rooms and learn a little bit more about this work. So we've got a breakout room focused on community stewardship. That's really about our on the ground work, working with street trees and gardens throughout the neighborhood and how you can get involved in them. And then we'll dig more into the neighborhood advocacy work, specifically the wins and sort of the process of the rezoning, as well as the next steps.
So let's start by laying the groundwork for what we are talking about when we say public green space. In New York City, we have 30,000 acres of city parks. That includes 10,000 acres of natural areas in all the 5 boroughs. There's some national parks, there are some DEC parks, there are rain gardens, community gardens. There are also about 700,000 individual street trees that are planted on public streets. And who maintains all these places? The Parks Department, of course, maintains the 30,000 acres of parkland, but as you guys probably have already heard this, Parks budget is less than 1% of the city's budget. And Parks is also one of the biggest landowners in the city. So they really don't get to do the type of care that their land needs. So there are some public-private partnerships, for example, Prospect Park Alliance, where I work, or Central Park Conservancy, that are private partner that raise, dollars from fundraising or other grants or anything to work in a specific place. And then there are other nonprofits like GCC that don't partner with a city agency or are not, a public-private partnership. They're just the nonprofit that care for a neighborhood and do the necessary maintenance in that area. And then there are the volunteers that either do one-off events or are part of community groups or just volunteer with one of these organizations that have volunteer opportunities. So now I want to introduce Natasha Siddhartha, who is the Community Stewardship Director at GCC, and she'll tell us more about the programs that are happening.
Thanks, Layla. Before I talk about that, I want to talk about combined sewer overflows, which is the other source of pollution that exists in the canal. So Andrea talked about Superfund cleanup, which is addressing historical pollution, but combined sewer overflows are still an issue that we deal with to this day. Next slide. So if you are not already familiar, we utilize a combined sewer system in NYC. So we have both wastewater and stormwater that enter the system. And if both of those volumes exceed the capacity of the pipes, essentially, then it overflows into the nearest body of water. In a typical dry day, all of this sewage goes to a sewer treatment facility, but with all of this rainfall, that system becomes overwhelmed. And so in the Gowanus watershed, this excess sewage and stormwater flows right into the Gowanus Canal. Every year, there's about 363 million gallons of combined sewer overflow that enter the canal. You can see this happen every time it rains. You can stand at a street end right in front of the salt lot, which I'll talk about, and see this happen. So obviously this is a huge environmental issue, but there are ways to reduce CSO. So you can do a couple of things like wait to run your dishwasher or your washing machines while there's rainfall. Obviously, advocacy is a big one, especially through the city, but also you can go to the websites that are on the screen to learn more, and also telling your neighbors and your friends and family about CSO. You can also do a self-guided walking tour. We also have regular public walking tours, especially through Open House New York, which happens every year. To learn more. And I will be talking about stewardship. That is a really fun and easy way to take care of local green spaces, especially because those green spaces absorb stormwater and reduce the amount of CSO. And so what is stewardship? So many of you in this room already know what it is. For those of you who are not familiar, there are a couple of ways that you can do this. So one of the biggest ways that you can steward green space is through time and physical labor. A lot of the public spaces that Layla mentioned are constantly in need of trash removal. A lot of them have poor soil, so replenishing the soil with compost is an easy thing to do, and also planting native plants because they are well adapted to the local ecology. Supporting your local community garden or block association is another way. Many of those groups are volunteer run and need a lot of donations to replenish old tools or purchase plants or install tree guards. And then there's also advocacy and coalition building, which we'll talk more about. And so we're going to do a deep dive into a lot of the spaces that Layla mentioned in the beginning. We'll start with street trees, which is the #1 way that I personally love to do stewardship. And I think Layla would say the same. So I'm going to hand it off to her.
Yeah, street trees are one of my favorite things. And they are, in most cases, something that you don't really have to go very far to find one. In most areas, they're readily available, and they're really small chunks of nature that everyone has access to. So there's some ways to care for street trees, and I think it would be good to kind of review them quickly. One of the most enjoyable and beneficial things that you can do is to care for that patch of soil that the tree lives in. The trees come usually from big nurseries. They grow in the nurseries sometimes up to 5 years. They, are taken out with a chunk of their soil, and then they're put in this smallish patch of land, and it takes them a long time, especially new trees, to adapt that area. So aerating the soil, taking the weeds, invasive weeds that are sucking too much of the nutrients out of the soil, and planting it with native plants, as Nastasia was mentioning, to provide pollinator habitat, beautifying your block, and improving the soil is a great way to do this. And that also helps a lot with increasing the stormwater absorption that each of these street trees do. That helps with our combined sewage overflow. This is a great example of native plants that were planted in a tree bed. There's some echinacea, yarrow, black-eyed Susan, asters, and also another thing to mention here is that tree guard that is specifically made by GCC folks out of metal, because a lot of times, trees are not protected from humans, dogs, and cars in this neighborhood. So protecting them by having a frame around a tree guard really helps the trees. And then watering in the really hot summer months is another way to care for trees. And improving the soil by, again, aerating, applying compost, and removing trash is one of the ways that you really don't need a lot of resources to do that. Another kind of tree care that is a little bit more delicate is pruning, which means removing dead, damaged, or diseased limbs off of a street tree. This requires training and actually a certificate for you to be able to do that. And you can get that certificate from Trees New York. It's called the Citizen Pruner course. Another important thing to know, I think we've all seen tree beds in New York City. A lot of them have cobblestone, or just the tree has grown too much in that tiny patch of area. So removing the cobblestones that are on top of the roots and exposing the soil underneath is a way that, creates better habitat for that tree. And then you could do the other acts of stewardship in that exposed area. This is a little bit tricky because if you're breaking the concrete, or if if you're expanding it bigger than a size that is in the city specs, then you would need a permit for that. But getting that permit is not very hard, and there's instructions on the Parks Department. But generally, just removing the cobblestones is a great way to expand that tree bed. And there are also some things it's important to note. There are things that we should not do. There's quote unquote bad stewardship that doesn't help the tree and actually damages the tree. So this is a really good example of it. I think the people that lived across from this tree wanted to create that wall around it, and then had put a lot of soil kind of too high on the tree, and that really had suffocated the roots of the tree. So with a storm, the tree did not have any more roots, and it's a beautifully healthy looking tree, linden tree, but it was going to fall on the house. And I think they acted in time, called 311, and were holding the tree in place with sticks, but the tree had to be removed, and it was really sad to watch. But I had to take a photo to show, this is, I don't think the family that did this knew that they were hurting the tree. And there was also astroturf kind of covering the soil. So I think that was another negative impact on this tree. Oh, and then please don't lock your bike to a tree. That's just, there's a lot of things that you can lock your bike to. Don't lock them on young trees, especially, yeah, it's just not fair. Yeah, and then the tree map. Nastasia, do you want to talk about the tree map?
Yeah, I wanted to walk through the opportunities to join a street tree stewardship group. So all of the stewardship care that Layla mentioned, you can do on your own. Anyone can do it, except for the pruning, which you do need a certificate for. And I saw that, Elizabeth, you asked about where to get it. Yes, you do get it from Trees New York. I think they offer the course every spring and fall. And when you do stewardship, you can actually go on the New York City street tree map to see which trees need the most help. You can filter the trees based on their health, the size of the tree, so you can search for the youngest trees and make sure they're getting watered. You can also see who's done work already. So I just clicked a random tree on this map near Gowanus. And if you see on the bottom left, you saw that GCC already weeded, aerated the soil, mulched, and removed trash. So you know that you don't need to walk over to that tree and do that. And then the other ways to get involved, one of the programs that GCC runs is called the Gowanus Tree Network. They are neighbors working together to build a healthy urban forest. So this year, we host about 10 what we call tree ambassadors every year from the neighborhood. They enroll in free citizen pruner training. They receive tree guards, tree bed expansions, plants, and compost, and they also organize their neighbors to do the actual stewardship. Before the pandemic, we also had all of the blocks enter the greenest block in Brooklyn contest, which you can still do now, but at a smaller scale. But this year, we're really focusing on taking care of industrial trees. So even if you don't quite make it within the 2-block radius of the canal that we typically steward, you can still adopt industrial trees, and definitely reach out to us to do that. You don't have to be a part of the Tree Network program. You can still do that and get support from GCC. And I think Andrea mentioned this in the first part of the presentation, but we've seen proof of stewardship being essential to tree survival. There were trees on specifically Nevin Street between Union and Carroll that died twice or 3 times and got hit by trucks and didn't make it because they weren't getting watered enough. And once they received that stewardship, they finally survived. You can also join us for public volunteer events. This typically happens in the spring and the fall. Fall is the perfect time for tree stewardship because you can do mulching and planting, and but summer is also the time to water street trees. So I'm going to go through a couple of other sites in Gowanus, although we could probably talk about street trees all day. Rain gardens are another stewardship site that we take care of. This is what we call the 6th Street Green Corridor. It's a set of 13 bioswales in Gowanus. And since we constructed these bioswales, we've learned how much maintenance they need, and that the city does not have the resources to do this work. And so in the past year, in 2021, we started a collaboration with 3 other watersheds, the Newtown Creek watershed, the Bronx River watershed, and obviously Gowanus, to pilot and coordinate management of rain gardens so that we can better take care of the thousands of rain gardens that they're installing across the city. So through this collaboration, we're looking for more funding for maintenance, standards and goals for jobs, making this a full-time permanent job to take care of these rain gardens, because that is what you need in order for plants to survive, in order for these engineered gardens to function properly. And also the education around it, making sure that people know that these aren't just regular beds. They're highly engineered bioswales that absorb more stormwater than other green spaces would, and also just create workforce development to take care of this through those jobs. But in the meantime, we are still taking care of these gardens with volunteers. And so through our public volunteer programs in the spring and the fall, you can join us to take care of these gardens. And most of the work is really removing trash, which builds up weekly, and clearing the inlets and outlets so that they are functioning properly and absorbing stormwater. Other spaces we take care of are parks and community gardens. So we have partnered with public housing at Warren, Wyckoff, and Gowanus to take care of community gardens. This is one that Green Team, Anthony and Madison, and Teresa, one of the neighbors at Warren, installed this past summer. And then there are also, it's another photo of us visiting a nursery. And then also taking care of your local park. So this is Thomas Green Park. Typically parks in New York City have Friends of groups, although larger parks like Prospect Park and Central Park have larger conservancies. A lot of these are smaller parks that are volunteer run, and they always need volunteers to help with mulching or planting or watering. Typically they will have It's My Park days. This is one of them in the fall. There are also community gardens like Green Thumb run community gardens in Gowanus. An example is Green Space on 4th. You may have passed by it before, on 4th Avenue, right off the Union Street stop. They're a wonderful volunteer run group, and they always need help taking care of their space. I also want to talk about the Lowlands Nursery. So Gowanus Canal Conservancy has a native plant nursery. It is mission driven, which means that we offer plants that are well adapted to the urban conditions of Gowanus specifically, but we also educate and engage the community to do the stewardship that it takes to run this nursery. So you can come to a public volunteer event and do propagation, learn about propagation if you don't know about it. So that includes like dividing plants, doing cuttings, sizing up plants. And I would say about 50% of these plants goes out to the neighborhood, either at a discount or for free, like through the Gowanus Tree Network. And we donate a lot of it to community gardens and school gardens. And in the spring, starting back again in the spring, you can purchase plants as well. And public space planting is always discounted. So that includes, like, if you want to purchase plants for your street tree, you can get a discount for those plants. And if you are interested in doing plantings for street trees, we can give you recommendations of what works best. We've done a couple of pilots and have seen that a select number of species do the best in Gowanus specifically. So we can share with you what has survived. Here are a couple of volunteers doing this, doing some cuttings on the right and propagating. This is the type of work that you can get involved in the nursery. And then the last thing you can do is advocacy. So Layla is going to talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, and I think that, really this time, that the past 2 years, there's been a momentum in New York City for trees and parks. I think a lot of us, I see in the chat, people saying that going to these green spaces saved their lives. We were all stuck, and the importance of green space, I think, was a lot more talked about, and a lot of newer coalitions kind of started around this time. There's the Forest for All New York City Coalition, formerly known as the Urban Forest task force that's about creating a shared vision and an urban forest agenda that's brought city, state, national organization, and then local nonprofits, environmental justice groups, universities, researchers all together in one place to work on this urban forest agenda. There's the Playfair coalition that was started by New Yorkers for Parks, and their goal was to restore New York City's budget. Well, before the pandemic, they started, and they were advocating for having more budget for the Parks Department, which they succeeded. But then with COVID, that budget was slashed. But then again, in 2021, they were able to fight for it and restore the parks budget. There's Save Our Compost, another coalition that happened. Forests and Cities is a more national coalition that brings different cities that manage green space people to talk and share best practices. And, you know, there's always other ways to just, you don't have to be part of a coalition to just talk to your neighbors or go do kind of advocacy work on your own.
Thanks, Leila. And then lastly, I wanted to share stewardship resources. So these live on our website. And obviously you can always email us if you have specific questions. But there are a ton out in New York City. So educational resources, we have our own, but also we talked about Citizen Pruner. Super stewards are another way to get involved. I believe that you can do things like use hydrants if you become a super steward and water your trees. And then Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Audubon Society has lots of resources about plants and other tree care tips as well. I talked about the nursery. We will be moving to a different site. The photos that you saw are at the salt lot, but we will be moving just a couple of blocks away and restarting our nursery there, so you can come visit us in the spring. The compost project hosted by Big Reuse will stay on the salt lot for the next 2 years, and you can always pick up compost for free there. They have sifted and unsifted compost, and they have a wealth of knowledge about compost if you are unsure of how to use it. They also have free food scrap drop-offs there 24/7. So there are green bins outside, and you can drop off food scraps, which they will use to create compost that you can then pick up for free. And then lastly, there are tools available. The old stone house now has a tool lending library. It's currently open for school gardens only right now, but they're a wonderful resource as well. And just to close it out, a thank you to the funders who keep our volunteer programs going, DEC, Forest Service, council members in Patagonia, and then also to our volunteers and partners, some of you who are here and maybe even in this photo. Thank you for helping us run our nursery and attending our volunteer events and spreading the word. So I think the last part, in the next 15-20 minutes, we can open it up to questions, and I see the chat is lively, so I can take a peek and add on to it too.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I see someone said, I know someone who lost his bike when thieves cut down the tree. That's horrifying.
Just another reason why you shouldn't.
Just another reason you should not do that.
Thank you, Teddy, for typing in the chat about green space. Yes, they're an amazing native plant community garden, one of the few, I think, in New York City, and they always need help.
Yeah, and industrial trees are really on, exactly as Rachel said, they often need more attention, and there's not usually a direct, directly someone living across them that you could like engage and have them work in it. So a lot of trees in Gowanus are an industrial, a lot of newly planted street trees are in the IBZ zone.
I have a couple of questions. One is about CSOs, which is how long after it starts raining does it take before you can like start to see overflows?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I'm sure there's like an exact answer to that. I can say
Rough.
Yeah, I can say anecdotally, I've been, if you're standing at the salt lot, which is 2nd Avenue and 5th Street, there is a sewer overflow pipe at the end of 2nd Avenue, and the pump that literally pushes out sewage into the canal is right there. And I've heard it turn on once it starts raining, like pretty soon after it starts raining.
Wow.
So I don't know if that actually, like releases the sewage, or if it's just like, oh, it's raining, it's time to turn on.
Yeah, I've really heard that it's like anything more than 1 inch of rain, and it all goes into the.
Yeah.
Quarter of an inch, yeah.
Exactly.
A quarter of an inch? A quarter of an inch?
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay, my other question is, if a street tree dies, what happens? And they cut it down. What happens to that that pit? Like, can you grind out the stump, or like?
That's a great question.
Sorry, I speak because there's literally an old tree pit on my block, and I feel like a tree probably got hit by a truck and is dead, and I'm like, yeah, how do you restore that pit?
Yeah, so you could always call 311 and ask for a stump grinder and to come and take the stump out, and also put in a request for a new street tree.
Okay, and if they come and plant a new, I put in a request for a new street tree, and I'm wondering if they're just gonna come and be like, oh, we need a stump grinder.
Well, yeah, I think the way that so each borough has their own forestry, division, and the forestry divisions have foresters, and everyone uses this thing called forms, which just like revolutionize the world of urban forestry and data, because it's live. All the 311 calls go to a central place, and then a forester goes and checks them out, and then they put a work order for that tree. So they have a tablet with all these work orders, and when the tree was removed but the stump was not removed, that is recorded in that work order if the person did their job right, which they usually do. So they should have a record of where there are empty street tree pits without stumps, or if there's an empty street tree pit that has a stump that needs the stump to be grounded first, and then the new tree comes.
Well, that's super helpful. Yeah, I'll let other questions.
Yeah, sometimes you think that you call 311 and it goes into a black hole, but it really doesn't. It just takes a long time.
It looks like Angela has more specific answers for the CSOs. So please feel free to unmute if you are up for it. We can also get back to that question later. I also got a question. I am curious to learn how the NYC open data map for trees is updated in terms of maintenance, who updates it, and how easy it is to update. So it is, it's open source. So you can create a sign-in and then update your tree maintenance. So anyone can do it. I think you can also like join a group. Like if you wanted to join the GCC group, you could, and write your or note your tree maintenance updates in affiliation to GCC. You can do that too.
Brenda also has her hand up.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Hi.
Good.
Thank you guys for hosting. This is really informative and really great. As you guys were speaking, I had a couple questions written down that I wanted to ask you guys about your street trees. And I have a couple questions, not too many. And they are, how do you deal with the larger trees with more matured roots? and you want to plant, are plugs preferred versus gallons or pints? And then do you fertilize, or is the nutrients gained from the compost? And also, when it comes to watering in the summer, do you have a magnetic cap key for the fire hydrants? Sorry, if you need me to repeat a question, I can as well, but those are all my questions that I had going on when you guys were speaking.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Those are wonderful, specific questions. Thank you for even thinking about taking care of your trees. I'll go backwards. So the fire hydrants, yes, you're right. There are, for those who don't know, there are two types of fire hydrants. So there's one that has like the pentagonal shape, which you can literally just use any wrench to open. And then the other one is sort of like a free spinning magnetic hydrant. A fun fact is that those, I don't know, wrenches are very specific, and there is one, I'm not sure if they're still there now, actually. There's a special effects place that's on Nevin Street that sells them because they need it to open fire hydrants with that specific type of cap. They're very expensive. The last time that we purchased one, it was like $900 or something ridiculous. You can also use like very strong magnets and a big wrench to open it, which I wouldn't recommend. But through the Super Stewards program, I believe that when you get a certificate or license or whatever it's called, you can only open the non-magnetic hydrants, unfortunately. But if you are in, I don't know, Brenda, if you're in Gowanus, definitely reach out to us and we might be able to support you in watering street trees with magnetic caps.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then you had questions about planting, right, in mature trees. Yes, this is an issue that I've seen, especially like further up the slope where there are like big mature trees in like really tiny beds. The ideal is that those tree beds get expanded. So literally like just removing the concrete. And then you can, backfill with compost and soil and then planting. But if you have a little bit of room, you might be able to plant like some sedum or some like plants that have shallower roots. That's a possibility. And then depending on the state of your soil, you might be able to add like ideally like unsifted mulchy compost is best for street trees, but you might be able to, if you have a smaller bed, like use sifted compost. Did that answer all your questions?
I guess the ones that I didn't really, or I don't know if you did answer it with the unsifted mulch, was if like how is the nutrition gained, and if you guys fertilize.
Yeah, we use compost since it's so rich in nutrients to add to the soil. I would say though, planting native plants also increases like stormwater absorption and allows, well, I don't know, Layla, do you have thoughts on that question specifically about soil improvement or like planting?
Yeah, I think it really depends on a couple of things. The first would be how compacted the soil is, and kind of, when it rains, or just the texture of the soil. I think composting and mulching always helps, but I think sometimes the condition of the soil is just so degraded, and it's really lower because in years it has eroded so much that adding, aerating and then adding a little bit of compost and new soil helps, as long as the tree is not buried in the new soil. It's still, the tree flare is out. But I think, yeah, Natasha, as you said, planting native plants always helps kind of regenerate the soil.
Yeah.
Are there specific trees, Brenda, that you're thinking of?
No, I mean, I know that a lot of the more new green infrastructure rain gardens, they've been planting a lot of like the service bells, lots of ginkgo, always the honey locust. But no, it's not like any specific type of tree that I'm just like, I have like a couple questions about, some of that maintenance and curiosity, as you guys had mentioned, that when it came to the maintenance for these rain gardens, it ends up just being actually a lot of like litter pickup, and you're picking up a lot of dumping and stuff like that. So I was just kind of like, picking your brain about how you guys go about doing it with your team. And it sounds like you guys have like a pretty big team when it comes to like the overseeing of those projects, and that it's very volunteer based as well. So, and that was like another question, but I didn't know if that was more of a question once everyone's back together. But it's more like when you're overseeing planting and maintenance, like how big are your groups, and does that include your volunteers and your stewardship programs? Which might also be off topic, but these were just questions I had written down, and like, well, I have.
No, I think that's actually a really good question. I think, Natasha, maybe it would be good if you explained the way that the GCC program works, and the cleaning greens and.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned public volunteer programs are a way for volunteers to get involved like one-off or multiple times. And I would say there's sort of like there's like the stewardship part, which is like anyone can do. You can do the planting, you can do, pick up trash, whatever. But then there's also the maintenance piece of like the watering and the pruning and like the seasonal landscape management that you have to do, which GCC staff take on with support of volunteers. So yeah, I think in terms of planting specifically, we utilize stewardship, and we utilize volunteer stewardship in order to do the bulk of our work. But there's also, a lot of these other like plant management things that we have to do outside of those like one-off volunteer days, which volunteers are also welcome to join us on. I mean, we're out in the field a lot, I would say.
Yeah. So we have our 5-minute warning, but we have to head back to the breakout room. There's one other question. Are there any apiary beehives kept at GCC?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brenda. We used to keep bees at the salt lot, but our beekeepers moved away and it was difficult to maintain. So we ended up donating the bees to another group. But yeah, I think in terms of like pollinators in Gowanus, we're actually not super lacking. There's so much life, and especially in our gardens. Yeah, not just bees, but butterflies and flies and birds.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are apiaries at the Red Hook Farm. Someone mentioned that in the chat.
That's right. Also, hi, Teresa. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. So are there any last minute questions? We have 3 more minutes before we get kicked out. Does everyone know how about the GCC website and how to sign up for the volunteer events?
Yeah, I'll put in a plug for that too. So for the spring, we'll open up public volunteer events again, probably in like late March, early April. So anyone can join. And I expect, unfortunately, that we probably won't be out of this pandemic anytime soon. And so they will be smaller capacity events, like 10 people or less in distance, and all outside, of course. And Jordan plugged in the volunteer webpage. So we have a sign up form that you can sign up for events. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And you are always welcome to email our general email, which is info@GowanusCanalConservancy.org if you have specific questions about the tree in front of your house, or like there's a big bag of trash in the rain garden down the street. What do I do with that? Yeah, all of these things that require resources, and so we're here to support.
Yeah, and if there's, any ways that you can think of that GCC can better support their community stewards, we're always happy to hear your ideas about that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Did we get all the questions in the chat? I'm going to do one last scroll.
Great. Oh, I'm sorry that Angela couldn't plug in her CSO answer, but maybe she'll reach out later to you, Teddy, specifically.
Thanks for all the folks that added the Super Stewards website and all the additional stuff.
Oh. Thank you all. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and we'll be going back into the main room for some closing words, I think. So if you all wanted to take a little break and then join us back in the main room, I hope you do. And thank you for joining us in this breakout.
Joining. Good to meet folks.
So I think we're ready to get started.
Okay, great. All right, so everyone, please apologize for my lack of matching background here. But I'm Venetia Lannon, and as you may have heard, I have recently joined as co-chair of the board of the Conservancy. So I'm really excited to be in that new position as co-chair, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel tonight on neighborhood advocacy. And as you've heard from Andrea, just so impressive, really this is a snapshot, but really culminates probably 6 years worth of work in this arena. So want to start by introducing our presenters. We're going to hear from Diana Gruberg and Amy Motsney this evening. And I would definitely want to just jump right in. So if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about how this is going to work, and hopefully your phone or computer won't overheat. Mine, I literally just put it in the refrigerator. I don't know if that's going to work, but anyway, so your microphones are going to be muted during the presentations, but Q&A is definitely welcome. That is the purpose of these sessions, is to really engage with you. So please type your questions into the Q&A, into the chat box, and or you can also use the raise hand feature when we get to the Q&A part. So type your questions into the chat. When we get to the Q&A, you can raise your hand if you don't feel like putting your questions into the chat, and we'll be alternating. Emily's going to help me out reading questions out loud or calling on people who've raised their hands. Also, please note this event is being recorded. So if that is uncomfortable for you, then you can opt out at this point. So that's it on participant guidelines. Why don't we go to the agenda? So we're going to be hearing first about our advocacy strategy, which, as I said, is the culmination of really, I guess, closer to 6 years of incredible work by this board and more importantly, the staff that you're going to hear from, and about the wins that you heard about in the Gowanus rezoning. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on the top 3 wins that we secured with the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. And then we're going to hear in particular about green and blue wins, and what that means for those of you who don't know. Green meaning like the open space and parks improvement and sort of all the sort of plants and that Andrea talked about, plantings in the neighborhood, tree care, and blue obviously being stormwater management, combined sewer overflows. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I am now going to turn it over to Diana.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Venetia. So as Venetia mentioned, this year has really been a culmination of a lot of advocacy. And it came together under not one, but two separate ULURPs, land use review processes for the uninitiated. And those were started out as two separate ones in tandem, and then they were lumped together towards the end. So we're going to talk through both of these. So the first was the Gowanus Neighborhood Plan. And I'm sure you've heard us talk about it a lot over the years. This is a plan to rezone 80 blocks of the Gowanus neighborhood to mixed use and residential. And then the second on the right side of the slide is the Salt Lot CSO facility, which is the plan to build a 4 million gallon CSO detention tank as part of the city's obligations under the Superfund. And there's been a lot of attention focused on the neighborhood plan, but somewhat less on the Salt Lot. So GCC's voice was really critical in this advocacy work. And all this meant that GCC staff, including our Green Team youth employees, testified at a lot of hearings. So we thought we'd give you a little taste of what one of those hearings was like in a short video clip.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Gruberg, and I am the Landscape Director at Gowanus Canal Conservancy. My name is Jordan Hayden, and I'm the Engagement Manager at Gowanus Canal Conservancy.
My name is Joanne Zell, and I am the Youth Stewardship Manager and Nursery Coordinator at Gowanus Canal Conservancy.
My name is Anthony Pimentel. I'm a Green Team Senior Apprentice at Gowanus Canal Conservancy.
My name is Madison Myers, and I'm a Green Team Senior Apprentice with Gowanus Canal Conservancy.
I'm Andrea Parker, Executive Director of Gowanus Canal Conservancy. Since 2010, we have headquartered community stewardship, education for local students, and a native plant nursery at the BK6 Salt Lot, the proposed site for the Owl's Head CSO tank. While we support this proposed critical infrastructure to reduce CSO into the canal, we implore the city to commit and follow through on our three asks. 1, communicate effectively and regularly with site occupants.
2, provide support for upcoming relocation.
And 3, produce a final site design that keeps the Salt Lot the eco-industrial heart of Gowanus.
So that was just a little snippet of what it was like. You know, at times boring, at times exciting, but really just one moment along a long detailed timeline of comments, testimony, outreach, and press releases at every step of both processes. From the 2018 release of the draft scope of work to just last month with the release of the points of agreement, which we'll discuss later on, and the City Council and Mayor's approval of the plan. Next slide, please. And of course, we were not alone in doing all this work. So 5 years ago, we joined up with partners in the neighborhood to form the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice, a diverse coalition aimed at elevating voices that hadn't been sufficiently heard to advocate for a just and inclusive rezoning. And the coalition, as many of you probably know, includes different groups with different interests, from public housing residents and advocates to environmentalists, artists and makers, and advocates for the industrial business community. And part of the idea with this was that our voices would be loudest and most effective if they sung together. And we really needed the rezoning to meet all of our shared priorities, and most importantly, to ensure a just, equitable, and inclusive community into the future. So we wanted to kind of take you along a really quick version of what happened. So early on as a coalition, we formed 4 committees and we set to work developing a platform, which resulted in over 60 demands. And in order to be effective, we realized we couldn't advocate at the same level for all of these. So we used a prioritization method to evaluate them. And then we came together as a coalition to look at all the demands strategically along a timeline. You can see us here looking at it together. And in this process, we built consensus over many months. Next slide. And then finally, months later, after a lot of conversations, we voted. And we narrowed our asks down to just 3 deal breakers and 16 priorities. And I'm sure you've heard us talk a lot about these over the years. So the first is upfront funding for local public housing repairs. The second, net zero combined sewage overflow. And the third, a community-based task force to provide oversight. Next slide. And then we got to work advocating together. And so just wanted to show you some of the milestones along the way. And some of you may have been at some of these demonstrations and events. So this was from summer of 2018, a demonstration at the DCP, Department of City Planning open house, where we brought a bunch of chairs, even though it wasn't supposed to be a meeting style meeting, and forced a meeting to happen along with a speaker. So this is Karen Blondell, kind of turning it into a meeting. And then fall of 2019, we had a Halloween demonstration of our Gowanus Punami at the Thomas Green Park. You can see our Punami hats here. And then spring 2021 was the press conference at the community board hearing where a lot of people came out to testify. Next slide. And then this was just last month, fall 2021, the press conference at the City Council Land Use Committee hearing at City Hall. So now I'm going to hand it over to Amy Motsney, who is going to talk about what we won.
Sorry, I'm doing technology and presenting. So I just wanted to talk about what we actually won through these exhaustive processes over the last several years. And we really saw wins in two distinct areas, one within the zoning text itself, which really pertains to a lot of the waterfront sites, mainly as part of the waterfront access plan, and two, as part of the points of agreement document, which identifies firm commitments from the city for community benefits. So within that points of agreement, it's over 30 pages, listing out 56 commitments from the city, including upfront funding for public housing, mandating and tracking net zero CSO, investments in long-term resiliency and infrastructure, investment in parks and open space, improvements in waterfront design, access, and ecology, and ensuring long-term open space ecosystem restoration and community stewardship at the salt lot. So as part of these points of agreement, there are commitments towards the three demands that GNCJ has been advocating for. Again, that funding for local housing is the huge win. It's over $200 million of capital investment for comprehensive in-unit renovations of all apartments at both Gowanus and Wyckoff houses. This also will entail regular reporting and consultation with the residents through the construction process to oversee all commitments and to protect tenant rights. The second is net zero CSO, and I'll go into more detail towards the end of this, but basically we're getting a better than net zero CSO deal with regular tracking. Additionally, we're going to get a cloudburst study for flood mitigation and resiliency planning moving forward, and then over 174 million in capital investment for sewer upgrades. And then finally, commitments towards the community-based task force. So the task force details are still being ironed out, but the city has secured seed funding for the task force to hire a facilitator who will help oversee the formation process and ensure equitable representation for the community, state, and from community stakeholders. It will also require senior agency representatives to report on quarterly commitments made throughout the rezoning process. And all meetings are going to be open to the public beginning in the first quarter of 2022. So we're going to sort of narrow in and talk a little bit more about the green and blue wins, which are near and dear to GCC's heart. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by the city's agreement to commit to net zero CSO. And the first, you may have heard us talk about this over the last couple of years, but the city is committing to a citywide policy called the Unified Stormwater Rule, which is going to impose more stringent stormwater controls on new development sites. It's an update on the 2012 stormwater rule. It's going to require new development to manage more stormwater through green infrastructure. In the environmental impact statement, the city reports that with this rule in place, new development spurred by the rezoning will actually show a reduction in combined sewage overflow by 5 million gallons a year. And most importantly, there's going to be a commitment to tracking and annual reporting, both for the Gowanus sewer shed and reported citywide as part of the New York City Green Infrastructure Report.
Amy, can I ask you to just give the CSO 101 briefly?
Oh yeah, sorry. I guess we didn't go over that in the main presentation, but combined sewer overflow, for those who are not familiar with the term, is basically this happens every time it rains in New York City, and it's because our sewer system is designed at a capacity that is not sufficient for the level of population density that we have and all of the impervious surfaces. the system itself holds both stormwater and sewage. So when we have extreme weather or any sort of wet weather, all the stormwater goes the same pipes that the sewage goes into. And this results in discharges. It's kind of like an emergency mechanism that was built when the system was designed, that discharges wastewater and stormwater flows into the canal. So this is a huge ongoing source of pollution to the canal, over 360 million gallons of sewage and stormwater pollution entering the canal every year. And so we as an organization have been advocating for a zero CSO situation from the Gowanus Canal watershed. As the rezoning has been on our radar, we've been really trying to ensure that new development does not add to this problem and that it can really be part of the solution. So that's why this new policy is really exciting. It's going to be citywide, but it will really have these amazing benefits for Gowanus, and we'll be able to sort of track them over time with these commitments that the city has made in the POA. So part of, this tracking and monitoring and this advocacy around reducing combined sewage overflow is also, we need to look at the stormwater, and we need to look at, how much rain is entering the system. We're seeing increased rainfall as a result of climate change, and flooding is a regular occurrence all throughout Gowanus. And this is kind of the same issue. Our sewer system is at a capacity that can't hold the volume of water coming in. So one thing the community has been asking for many years is some type of hydrology study that really looks at the drainage patterns, but also the subsurface conditions to understand where flooding is a problem and where we need solutions to help fix it. The city is committed to this cloudburst study. They're going to be doing 10 of them throughout New York City. Gowanus Red Hook and the Gowanus IBZ will be included as one of these studies. So it's going to really look at the stormwater flow paths based on the topography. It's also going to look at the subsurface conditions, the existing sewer network, and it's going to factor in socioeconomic conditions to identify where there are gray and green infrastructure needs for flood mitigation and overall water management. And additionally, another piece that's really going to help to alleviate flooding is this $174 million investment to upgrade sewer infrastructure along 4th Avenue. Particularly, it's going to address persistent flooding at the intersection of 4th and Carroll. There will be upgrades to an existing pump station at the intersection of 9th and 3rd Ave. It's going to alleviate street flooding during a 5-year storm and substantially reduce CSO in the Gowanus Canal. The feasibility analysis for this is underway, and the design will start in 2023 with construction anticipated to begin in 2028. So that's kind of the overview on the net zero CSO and blue commitments. I'm going to pass it back to Diana to talk more about the green pieces, starting with the waterfront.
Thanks, Amy. So along the waterfront, all the developers who own property will be required to build waterfront esplanades, and these are going to be dictated by the waterfront zoning that the city just passed. So we've been advocating a ton for specific requirements to be written into that zoning text. And we saw a bunch of wins on tidal wetlands. So there's going to be a new allowance for tidal wetlands and incentive. Diverse elevations, so you won't just be at one height along the canal, but 2 different heights. Reduced lawn requirement, as well as incentives. Sorry, can you go back a slide? As well as incentives for public restrooms, public art, active recreation, boat launches, playgrounds, and more. The city also made a commitment to identify locations for in-water access, such as boat launches, and to study the feasibility of pedestrian bridges, which the community has been asking for to increase places that you can actually cross, and then to share design concepts with the community before what's known as certification. So certification is when a developer creates a design for their waterfront and then needs to get it approved by the City Planning Commission. So what we are going to see next, likely in the next year, is the certification of individual site waterfront lines. We also saw some wins for public spaces. So the map on the right-hand side of this slide shows a number of public spaces that we've been advocating for. The light green are existing, public spaces, and the dark green are future ones that we're advocating for. So the red stars highlight commitments that have been made by the city to timelines and funding for new public spaces. So the first on this list, the Transit Plaza at Smith and 9th Street. That's right near the Smith 9th FG train stop right along the canal. So that the design is slated to start in 2023 with construction starting in 2025. The second is the Gowanus Green Park located at the site that's been known as Public Place. So that the design is slated to start in 2025 with construction starting in 2027. The head end tank that Andrea mentioned in the main room is slated to be completed in 2030. The design has already been underway for that. And then the salt lot CSO tank engagement is slated to begin at the end of this year and early next year. And then we've also seen commitments to renovation of existing public spaces. So on Thomas Green Park, in conjunction with the Superfund cleanup that's happening there. And then at the Old Stone House and Pacific Library. And then there were some public spaces we were advocating for that we didn't see wins on, including the DEP water tunnel site at 4th Avenue and Sackett Street, and Under the Tracks site, which is another MTA property located on 10th Street. So those are going to require future advocacy. So just to dive a little bit more into the salt lot, which Andrea talked about, we did see some commitments once those two land use review processes came together. So we did get a commitment to a temporary location for us during construction, as well as a long-term commitment to a home on the site and the creation of open space and a potential boat launch. And just wanted to call your attention to this proposal that we've made on the right-hand side of the slide of all the wonderful things we want to see here in the future, including a stewardship and education center, a large salt marsh, and public spaces, and then of course the nursery, compost facility, and gardens. So as I mentioned, there's going to be an engagement process and really encourage you all to get involved in that. Next slide. And then lastly, the Parks Improvement District. So this is something we've been advocating for some time that really looks at how are these spaces, these public spaces, going to be maintained and programmed over time. And so we're advocating for a Parks Improvement District formed through the Business Improvement District model to levy a tax assessment on new development to pay for this. So the city has said that they will support the creation of this, and it'll focus on stewardship, access, and public programming of open spaces along both new and existing waterfront esplanades, public parks, and streetscapes. And we heard that we advocated to developers and got 10 developers to sign on to support the formation. And their support is critical because it's required as part of the bid law formation process. And so we're going to be working on that beginning this winter. Next slide. So this has been a lot that we've covered. So we just wanted to highlight a few of the things that are coming up this coming year. So Amy talked about the Unified Stormwater Rule that will be enacted this month. It's expected to, and we'll see annual reporting moving forward. The engineering feasibility study for the Cloudburst study will start in the middle of next year. And then we expect to see waterfront certifications happening. And it's going to be really important that we're conducting advocacy to ensure that the new esplanades are engaging and vibrant. And we're going to be using the Gowanus Lowlands Master Plan, which you can look at on our website, in doing that advocacy work. At the salt lot, bulkhead construction will begin in the beginning of next year. And then long-term design engagement will continue into the future. And we're also going to need to advocate for restoration and ecology through a separate process called the Natural Resource Damages Process, or NRD, and that will be through the Community Advisory Group to the Superfund. And then on the Parks Improvement District, the steering committee kickoff will be this month, and then the plan development will begin next spring, along with a bunch of public meetings. And lastly, on the community-based task force, the first update meeting will be this spring, and then recurring quarterly. So that will be an important time for the community to get involved. So that is all we have for the presentation. I'm sure it seems like the chat was very busy during it. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please put any questions in the chat. And looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks and any questions that you have.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Thank you so much, and Amy. Emily, okay, so we're going to open it up now to the Q&A section. And I'm going to lean on Emily to both read questions and call on folks who have their hands up. So Emily, what do we got?
Great. Well, let's start off. Donna has raised their hand. Donna, please ask your question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that presentation. It was a lot. And I had sort of two questions. One was, did I understand, Amy, correctly that there's 360 million gallons of overflow going into the canal each year, and that the new plan will reduce that by 5 million, but does that mean there's still going to be 355 million gallons flowing in?
So the other piece is that the 2 CSO tanks that were mentioned in the initial presentation, those are going to also substantially reduce combined sewage overflow as part of the Superfund requirement. So they're going to reduce about 115 million gallons, and then about 5 million gallons will be reduced with the unified stormwater rule in place.
Because how much can it really absorb? Is there like a number that everyone's shooting for?
So it's based on the development site. So they have to meet criteria for a certain storm event. And that dictates like how much stormwater management they need to put in place. So it's supposed to address, the 10-year storm essentially. And right now it's gonna be an improvement on what we have right now, because most of the sites along the Gowanus and in the neighborhood don't have stormwater management in place. So all of those stormwater flows are either just directly going into the canal or into the pipes that are already over capacity. So this is going to really help to alleviate that stormwater burden, and we'll see improvements in the capacity of the system. And then with the infrastructure upgrades that are planned along 4th Avenue, that's going to free up some additional space in the system. So that's all going to really help to increase the reductions in CSO. We've been told, by the Department of Environmental Protection that it's not really feasible to get to a full 0 CSO situation in the canal. And that's just by the nature of the system design, because it was designed as a combined system. All these pipes are, some of them are ancient, and it would really require to have a fully 0 CSO situation. We would have to separate the system completely, which would really disrupt daily life in New York City.
Is it going to be clean enough for things like boating? And
yes, and that yes. So the state dictates terms under the Clean Water Act, and the Gowanus Canal needs to meet terms for what's called contact recreation, and that's based on the classification of the waterway. And so that water quality testing has to be done to satisfy federal requirements under the Clean Water Act. So the waterway will be able to support recreation, though today we know from doing our water quality sampling it's not always the case, especially after a rain event. As we continue to see these improvements in infrastructure and more stormwater management done, the canal will continue to get cleaner. Simultaneously, the Superfund process is going to really take out a lot of the historic pollution from industry and all of the contaminants that are sitting in the sediments.
Great.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks. Those are great questions. And thanks, Amy. Emily, who's next?
From the chat, we have a question from S. Javery, and it's about the greening of 4th Avenue. They mentioned that while it's been great to see the installation of bike lanes, the other promised improvements haven't begun yet. So that includes different green improvements in the medians and along the avenue. So I think there's a question of what is the promises from the city looking like in terms of the greening of 4th Avenue?
Okay, great. Diane, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, we've been working closely with SJ on this very issue and kind of had some momentum before the pandemic, advocating to DOT about it. And then it kind of, we saw a really big lull for a couple years there. So I think we have to continue to push. They have sent us plans showing that they are planning on greening some of the medians, but we need more details about when it's going to happen and exactly what it's going to look like. So totally agree on that, and totally agree that it would have been great for that commitment to have been written into the zoning text itself, or the points of agreement itself. Yeah, SJ, do you want to comment further?
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just raising the issue that we've talked about. And I don't think it's dead. I mean, I think that, some of the spirit of the rezoning and, particularly talking about parks and open space. I mean, we just need to keep reminding DOT that streets are open spaces too. And that 4th Avenue is probably the largest open space in the Gowanus. And they have presented to the community, these wonderful drawings of trees and bushes. And for a number of people, the bike lanes still don't feel safe, quite frankly. It still feels like riding in a very congested major street. And while they're terrific, and it's great that we have, the cars as buffers, there's still a lot more that needs to be done to improve that experience and to help reduce flooding, because there's flooding along all of 4th Avenue, not just the part where the construction's going, the new construction will take place, and also to reduce the kind of pollution that's experienced by cyclists or just pedestrians. So I think it's an opportunity, and I think it's a thing we just need to remember when we're talking about Gowanus projects.
Great. Okay, who's next?
Great. Next, we have a question from Erin from Green City Force. Erin, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi. Okay, so I garden at Gil Hodges on Carroll, just off of 4th Ave, and they're tearing down the auto body shop on the corner to put up a big new high-rise. And on a recent walk along President and Carroll between 3rd and Nevins, that whole block is like coming down. And, every other day I'm seeing permits filed for this new high-rise, that new high-rise. Because those permits are already filed, will the unified stormwater rule and the plans for affordability be implemented in all these new developments?
Yes, and that was a critical concern of ours. So essentially the city is not allowing any sewer connection permits to move forward until the stormwater rule is in place. And once it's in place, they will need to comply with it immediately. And that's something, so we've been, tracking this on the DOB website to just make sure that we're understanding each permit that's filed and keeping on top of them. I would say, any new development that's happening not on 4th Avenue is certainly going to include the affordable, like the mandatory inclusionary housing. There may be some development on 4th Avenue that was already happening under the previous rezoning that is not including affordable housing. And that was really, and I mean, if folks look at the overall rezoning map, there's a huge swath of 4th Avenue that it covers, a lot of which had already been rezoned for no affordable housing, for luxury housing. And so a big part of this rezoning was sort of fixing that previous rezoning to make sure that there was more affordable housing built.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay.
Great. Next, we have a question from Denny. Denny had asked about the definition of combined sewage overflow, and then had asked, is the goal to, build infrastructure to reduce that? So Denny's question is, are we, the GCC, confident that the city will keep its end of the bargain in promising to hold to net zero CSO for the Gowanus Canal?
That is a fantastic question, Denny, and thank you for asking it. And no, we are not confident. And that's exactly why this work is not done in any way, shape, or form. And that's why the task force is so critical. And this commitment to ensuring that senior agencies report to the task force on a regular basis, and we have clear pathways to hold them to it. And I mean, it's gonna take, we fought so hard to win what we won, but there is so much more work to do, and it is going to really take the community coming together to push this forward. Absolutely.
Awesome. Great question. Who's next?
Great. So from Judy, we have 2 questions. So on the amendments to the proposal, and one pertains to 4th Avenue. So Judy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your 2 questions about the proposal and about construction on 4th Ave?
Yes. Okay. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So there were a lot of amendments that went with the proposal coming from City Council approval, and also a lot of other amendments, some similar, some different, coming from Eric Adams as Borough President in his review. And I wondered, to what extent are those amendments part and parcel of the proposal that was accepted by City Council as a whole and the mayor as a whole?
Yeah, Andrea, another one for you.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, a lot of them were. And so basically I mean, again, because of the number of years that folks have been putting into this, I think the community board and the borough president and the council members were pretty well aligned as to what the priorities were. And so that list of 56 commitments covers most, if not all, of those, of the highest priorities on those lists.
Okay, and the second question had to do with green space on 4th Community Garden on 4th Avenue between Sackett and Union. So my understanding is that across the street where there was a gas station, I think it's Avery Hall is the developer, is planning a building of 17 stories in height from one edge of the sidewalk on Union Street to the other end of the sidewalk on Sackett Street. And that will totally block our light. And should the design of the building be such that the northern part of that building, on the half of the block that's in the north, that if the height was there, then it would overshadow a place where there is no garden at this point. It's just the other part of the DEP lot. And if the part that was across the street from the garden was no higher than a hotel that's on that Union Street block between 4th and 3rd, we would still get our daylight. Other than that, I don't know what we're going to do.
Andrea, is that one for you as well?
Yeah, and I don't think I have a clear answer to that. I think, Judy, I think it would be good for us to talk offline about that.
I know the Municipal Arts Society in their Fight for Light campaign has been successful on a couple of these issues. They may be a good partner, although it's tricky.
It might, and it would need to probably be an amendment to the existing zoning code now because the zoning code was passed. But I also do think that it might be more leverage to get public access to the actual DEP, the other DEP site as well.
Because I know there was a shade report where Department of City Planning was responding to people's concerns about some of the garden areas and the heights of buildings and trees and everything. And they just slippery, Tefloned everything right off the plate. It's only this many hours a day that you wouldn't get sunshine, and they were responsible for nothing in terms of building heights and how many tall buildings there were.
Great.
But if there's another agency that can work on that, all the better.
Yeah, let's make a time to chat soon about that.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So with 2.5 minutes remaining, we have one more question from Donna, and it's about the new location for GCC. So where is the GCC's new site going to be in the interim?
Andrea, you're getting all of these.
Okay, I'll take this. And I didn't want to say it out loud because it's not absolutely for sure yet, but we feel we are moving forward, working with MTA to get a temporary use of the site right by the FG stop at Smith 9th. So it's sort of a site that no one ever really realized was there. But I think it's actually quite large. It's waterfront. It's got good sun exposure, and we think it's actually going to be a really great place for us to be. And we've had really good talks so far with MTA, and are, crossing our fingers that this works out.
You want to say the location one more time for anyone who missed
Yeah,
it?
it's at Smith and 9th, right by the FG train stop.
Great, exciting. Okay, any other questions? I see some folks are signing off. We are going to go back to the main room in a couple minutes to have a closeout session, but would love to hear if anyone else has any questions or comments. I see a lot of thank yous. Yeah, I also want to thank our panelists and Andrea for fielding these questions. And thanks to everyone for participating. Going once, going twice. See, great job all. I'm gonna go get my phone out of the fridge. Okay.
Thank you all so much for coming. It's really great.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you all for coming back in and for being around. We're happy to be joined by our council member, Brad Lander. It'd be great if you could say a few words.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and just a big thank you to all the GCC team, to hang on, I gotta put the gallery back on. To Faisal, it's so weird, when your faces there big on that screen. To Faisal and the whole board, to Andrea and the whole staff. Obviously it's a lot more fun to be in person. The Conservancy throws great in-person gala events, and I'll be excited whether the next one's back in Industry City or wherever it will be, to be there in person with all of you. You do such good things in general, so I know you make Zoom Gala as good as Zoom Gala could be. But I wanted to make sure to come on this year especially and just pay my respects and real thanks to the Conservancy. Obviously, as we work to get the Gowanus Canal rezoning done, a few people have asked me, some version of what made it possible that the largest rezoning of the de Blasio administration, the first one in a wider, wealthier community, where you might have expected more, community dissent and opposition at the end of the day, to have such a broad coalition of support. And the answer for me has been really clear. It's that GCC and the other members of the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice did the organizing work of building community over a very long period of time, because it didn't start with a conversation about what was needed in the rezoning. It started from a set of people who cared deeply about the canal, about getting the canal clean, about cleaning the land around it, about building stewardship, about thinking about our climate future, about thinking about what it means to really anchor our community in values of sustainability and resilience and equity. And that means starting years and years ago, building this community, organizing with young people in public housing, building stewardship programs, thinking about how we pay attention to everything from the bioswales to the tree canopy, to envisioning the future together through the lowlands planning, and then digging in on the details, even though those details are as mucky and gross as CSOs. We would have been in no position to understand what's necessary, what it even means to pursue net zero CSO without the work you guys have done to educate the community on the one hand and engage with experts on the other. And what I just conclude is, this is a really challenging time for our democracy more broadly, right? Everything tends to become a kind of polarized fight. People are anxious about whether government can really keep its promises, whether it could be a vehicle for working together with neighbors to solve the biggest problems. And what I have had, thanks to you and GNCJ and Fifth Avenue Committee and Arts Gowanus and SBIDC and so many other partners, is that when people love their neighborhoods, when they build diverse coalitions, when they think like stewards, which means, yeah, I care about my community and I want it to be great in the future. And I might even be anxious about change, but I believe we could work together with neighbors to set some values, to think about our goals, and then to really fight fiercely for them. It is that work that you guys through GCC have done over the years that were the only reason that it was possible in partnership with others to move through this hard thing together in a way that I believe is going to really steward the community around the Gowanus forward in a way that meets our goals for inclusion and affordability, for resilience and sustainability, for building a community that reflects what we're all about. And I just treasure that. I feel really lucky to have gotten to work hard with you in so many ways to do that. And I'll be excited to keep coming as I can in my new role to the next graduation of the stewardship program, or maybe getting the occasional day to bring my compost down to the wherever the compost facility is. Hopefully it will be in that new transit plaza that we've won very soon. But I'm going to continue to be a real community partner. I think I've told this my favorite composting story of having to bring my composted leaves last year to the salt lot through a rave that was taking place on 2nd Avenue. But if you haven't heard that story, it's a good one. So ask me sometime over drinks. I'm really excited for the future of this community. I see your next council member, Lincoln Restler, on the Zoom. And I don't know if Shahana is here, but she is also going to be a really tremendous partner. The people of both the 33rd and 39th district have elected unbelievably good representatives. And between them and the ongoing work that you and others have done, you know, like the blessings of what it means to be in a community that people don't just care about, but work hard for, roll up their sleeves, do the hard work and build that community together. I'm gonna be here a long time as a resident. I'll be excited to come back when I can in my new role, but mostly I just wanted to come on and say thank you for the extraordinary work, not just of the period of the ULURP, but the years and years and years of building stewardship, and how much I'm looking forward to the future that I know you are going to be tremendous stewards of.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate that. And we really thank you for all of your hard work stewarding this and listening to us, and, you know, being part of really, you know, listening to the coalition. I think it was such an incredible partnership, and I feel so proud of what we've done together. And I'm also very excited for our new leadership. And Lincoln, it's great to see you here. I don't know, do you want to say a couple words?
Oh, great. Great. I just needed some help on meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It is great to be with Gowanus Canal Conservancy. It's tough to follow Brad Lander because I think if we could all agree that Brad has just been the absolute model of what a council member could and should be. So Shahana and I and all of the incoming council members have big shoes to fill. She just left me a few minutes ago, so hopefully she can hop on the Zoom from somewhere. But just wanted to thank you all for your tremendous work, especially during the rezoning process, as Brad said. Really excited to work in partnership with you and Shahana and all the members of GNCJ to make sure that the tremendous commitments that you all have secured from this administration are followed through upon in the next administration. And I think the Parks Improvement District is such an exciting new approach where we can really open up access to the waterfront. And thanks to your great advocacy over a number of years, we're gonna do everything we can together to actually make the Gowanus Canal as accessible and dynamic a waterway as it can be. And really look forward to working with you in partnership to push for green infrastructure everywhere. And really appreciate your great stewardship in our community and all the good work you do, and excited to be your partner in the council. I'll put my contact info in the chat if anyone has any questions for me, or if there are any ways in which I can be helpful, you know, don't hesitate to reach out. And we're very lucky to have Brad not too far away at 1 Center Street, looking out for the whole city and always being a partner for us here in Gowanus too. So thank you, Andrea, and it's just great to be with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great to have you here. So I'm going to turn it over to Venetia and Marcos to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, and agree. Those are both tough acts to follow. So I'll be very brief. And again, I'm so excited to be newly appointed co-chair of the board. Such an exciting time. I just want to give highlights from our breakout session on neighborhood advocacy, where we spoke about CSOs, open space in the Parks Improvement District. And I'll be so brief just to say, I think the main highlight is to say, as exciting as it is and as far as we have come, now is really the time to be engaged. Now, there's, whether you want to get engaged in the waterfront certification process, to advocate for vibrant open space, there are so many ways that you can, keep your voice strong. We had a great question that said, do you really think the city's going to keep all these commitments? That's a great question. We need to fight to make sure that the city keeps all these commitments. And that's why this task force that has been formed probably is, even though it seems sort of bureaucratic, is the most important thing of all, is that we need everybody to help GCC push all the agencies and the next mayor to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So please stay engaged. Recognize that this is not the end, this is the beginning really of the push to make sure that we realize our shared vision for the Gowanus. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my august chair, Marcos, who's going to talk about how we get there. Thanks.
Thank you, Venetia. So looking forward and how to get there. Volunteer. Help us try to figure out how to continue mobilizing resources in the community. Become a steward and advocate. I think what the GCC and all of our friends, everybody who volunteers, everybody in the community, I think what we have achieved, what you have achieved, is absolutely remarkable. But we cannot lose sight that what we're really doing is to continue to build community in a time of change. I think Venetia mentioned it very rightly and very correctly, which is this is not the end. The finish of the completion of the rezoning is a very minor step, is a very necessary step. But quite frankly, there's a lot of hard work that goes beyond advocacy that moves forward from now. And we should all be very proud of what we have accomplished, but also very eager and very hopeful to what we can do in the future. So please become a steward, volunteer, donate, become a member, and just continue helping us grow. We have our 15th anniversary coming up, now, and we're hoping to get your support in everything you do. If you can help, with the work that you do and your volunteerism, fantastic. If you can help us as thought and subject matter experts on everything that needs to happen from now on. If you're a volunteer, if you're a board member, please do so, and definitely do help us, continue to raise funds, or letting us know where we can raise funds in the future, and hopefully support all of our programs as well as the upcoming gala. And Andrea, you may want to.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to try to take a Zoom photo before we're done. So if everyone could put their cameras on. And Jordan, are you taking it?
Yes, I'm going to take it. So I will count us off. Okay, I'm going to take a few. So on 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and one more. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming. Great to see you. Hope to see you in person soon. Definitely next year in person. And thanks for all your support over the years, and happy holidays.
Thank you.